What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to your home for all things combat sports.
Yo.
Guys, Merab Dvalishvili did it again. He is very easily on his way to becoming the Bantamweight GOAT. Nick, I want to talk about the performance last night because John Wood said something in the build-up to this fight. Obviously, his coach out in Las Vegas, and he still has Ray Longo and Aljo and all those guys in his corner as well.
Right.
But one thing John mentioned in that pre-fight interview was, we all know how great Merab Dvalishvili is, but now I want to take his game to the next level, the evolution of Merab, if you will, and that is Merab as a finisher. Because when you start to put somebody in a status of the greatest of all time in a given division, or even just the greatest of all time in general for that matter, then you start to kind of tighten the microscope a little bit and start to find that, it's one thing to say somebody's great, somebody's a really good fighter, but when you start to put them with the GOATs, then people scrutinize a little bit more. And what's the one place where people can, criticize Merab? It's that he has a lot of wins by decision.
Right.
So John Wood said, you're going to see the next level of Merab here as a finisher. He made good on his promise last night with a beautiful modified north-south choke over Suga Sean, who, by the way, looked really good. And I want to talk about Sean, but first, I want to talk about how good Merab is becoming, because he's getting better with every fight.
Yeah, we have to talk about that. And boy, did they do a good job at changing Merab from a decision winner to now a finisher. And I believe his finishing ways are only just getting started.
Me too.
And most important aspect of Merab's game is confidence. And I do believe that Merab thought all along he was the best fighter in the world. But sometimes we get painted in these corners and you wind up believing it. And maybe it's because of your skill set or the results. But everybody was saying, yeah, Merab is really good. He's going to win most all his fights by decision. And I just feel like Merab is one of those guys that can make these minor adjustments. But the most important thing was being able to beat Umar Nurmagomedov, a high-level striker like Suga Sean twice. And now that he's able to finish him, it showed that the reason he got the finish was because he opened up with the striking. I mean, he significantly outstruck Suga Sean O'Malley.
And with the bigger shots, too.
Bigger shots. And Sean looked great. Like you said, that was a better version of Sean than we saw in the last fight, but also probably a better version of Sean than we've seen in other fights. He looked really good. It's just such a difficult task to try to beat Merab. And the amount of pressure and anxiety that he was putting onto Suga Sean was, and it all came from striking, was the reason he won this fight. The grappling, we knew that there was a major advantage for Merab when it got to the ground. And you saw from the very first trip, he went, he collected one leg, Sean stepped one way, immediately tripped to the other side. And he did that multiple times in the fight. He's just so good at chaining his trips in and finding a way to drag you to the ground. And the interesting thing about when he does get you to the ground, and this might have been why the choke opened up for him, is he usually doesn't look to pass guard. He's usually not trying to get beyond your legs. He wants to do some ground and pound. Most importantly, he wants to zap your energy and have you, just thinking and moving and reacting at 100% while he's on top of you. Optically, it looks horrible for scoring the round in your favor. And it's just one of those things that's demoralizing. And once you've got a guy that is outstriking you on the feet, that you came in knowing, okay, the only way I'm really going to win this fight is if I outstrike him. Once he starts outstriking you and can take you to the ground, it's the beginning of the end. And Sean didn't give up, but that position was just one that Merab is never going to not finish in. I think Merab's submission skills are underappreciated. I do think that he can find submissions, but I don't think it's been on the forefront of his mind. I think he's been preferring to beat guys for 25 straight minutes. He's been preferring to go a long time. And honestly, that's probably why he feels so comfortable in the octagon. At this point, he's got, half a day's worth of hours in the UFC octagon. Nowadays, it's all in 5-round fights. So he's really piling on the experience. And I just think a guy who now has the experience Merab has in 5-round title fights, and he's got the endless gas tank, but the confidence goes on top of both of those because he's not afraid to strike with anybody in the world now. If you can outstrike Suga Sean O'Malley, you can likely outstrike and beat anybody else at 135. I know that Corey Sandhagen's likely the next contender, and he's also a very good electric striker, but that's a very tough fight for Sandhagen to win. And Merab just had a fight very similar to what Corey Sandhagen might try to present for him in Suga Sean. So I do think even though we've seen Merab defend his title against two really formidable opponents, I think that's actually a blessing in disguise because he got the two hardest opponents out of the way. And even though I love Corey Sandhagen, he's certainly championship caliber. I don't see how he beats the current Merab. And in fact, I actually see when that fight happens, Merab being able to look for finishes just like he did last night.
Yeah, it seems like after watching Merab last night that the only thing that's going to defeat him at bantamweight is Father Time.
Right.
I mean, he's already got Umar out of the way. He's already gotten Sean out of the way. And those guys both presented real challenges. Umar from a stylistic standpoint.
For sure.
Because Umar had the counter, or we thought he had the counter to the grappling. And that was a close fight. I know Umar hurt his hand, and a lot of people are using that sort of as an excuse. But in reality, Merab handedly won that fight, even though it was a very entertaining, very high-level fight. And Sean possesses the very unique threat of the power. I mean, just ask Merab's best friend, Aljo, what happens when you zig when you should have zagged against Sean O'Malley.
Right.
He's very, very powerful, and he has a knack for finding his shots. Merab showed that he has a chin last night, too, because Sean did land more shots early than he landed in the first fight against Merab, because I think he was a little bit... He realized that the game plan last time didn't work. And if you just stay on the outside of Merab's range, you're going to end up losing a 5-round grinder, and it's going to be a boring fight, and you're not going to get anything off. So Sean, I think in a lot of ways was like, I'm going to go for the kill shot here. It may set me up for more takedowns and potential submissions, which is exactly what happened. But at least I'm going to try to go out on my shield. So I credit Sean for that.
Yeah.
But the Corey Sandhagen fight, which is definitely going to be what's next, is unique and challenging in a certain way, but I don't see Corey as the finisher. And I want to give this fight the shine that it's due when they make it. Obviously, we will break it down from all angles. We'll talk about potential paths to victory for Corey, but just I'm giving my initial, immediate Monday morning quarterback, thoughts on the Corey Sandhagen
with
fight.
a dose of recency bias. Right?
Exactly, with a heavy dose of recency bias. But Corey Sandhagen doesn't have the finishing ability that Sean does. He doesn't have the power in his hands. He's not the grappler that Umar is. He's very dynamic. He's tall, he's rangy, and he's damn good everywhere and with a lot of different tools in his toolbox to pull from. But it just seems to me like Merab has gotten the harder fights out of the way. And I mean, if you think about it, what is it, 6 of his last 8 fights were against former champions?
Yeah,
so it's like
that.
Sean twice, you have Marlon Moraes, you have Peter Yan, you have Jose Aldo, you have Henry Cejudo. So you've got double champ in Cejudo. Yeah. Olympic gold medalist wrestler. You've got Peter Yan, who is one of the most prolific strikers in the division, very good, very young former champion. You've got who was Jose Aldo, who was at 145, and a lot of people consider him to be the greatest of all time at the weight class above Merab. And the list just goes on and on and on. The guy is only knocking off champions or former champions, which begged the question because it came up last night. Is Merab's did the win over Sugar Sean for the second time with the finish bump Merab up to the greatest bantamweight of all time, in your opinion? And guys, before we finish up this conversation, Nick and I noticed something that is really concerning. Most of you that watch our videos are actually not subscribed to our channel.
What's up with that?
Guys, if you get value out of our content and you enjoy coming back and watching our videos and hearing our takes on the fights, we would really appreciate a subscribe. It costs you nothing, and you can always change your mind later.
Thanks in advance. 100%. So I might be a little bit early to that party, but Merab, based off of his last few fights, ever since like 2021, it's been that list of killers that you just named. And if they didn't have a world title, their last name was Nurmagomedov. So let's just be realistic. This is the most insane, deepest resume that a current champion's got in the UFC right now. Honestly, it's pretty close. But Merab does so many things well, and I'm really interested in this Corey Sandhagen fight. And obviously, last night they kind of made that fight, in the octagon and everything. And so they're talking to Corey after the fight, and he's getting some interviews in the back. And one thing he said to me that sticks out, and I don't want to get too far into the Corey versus Merab fight. There's plenty of time to make videos on that. But one thing he said was he was surprised that Sean was trying to move so much. And I just have to think about that because I assumed Sean's going to have to move a lot if
and
he wants
Corey
to win
moves
this
a
fight.
lot too when he
and
fights.
Corey
Yeah.
moves a lot. Now, is Corey going to try to do something different when he fights Merab? Perhaps slow the pace of the fight down and not move so much himself to force Merab to not move so much. I don't know if that's going to work. You might have to be on, like I was saying last night, 100% dialed in for all 25 minutes if you're going to beat Merab. You got to be literally just outside of range and right back into exchanges in his face, and then your main focus has to be on not getting taken down or you're back to the cage. Those things stick out to me. Sean looked like he was going for a high risk, high reward situation. When they fought the first time, he didn't throw anything. He wasn't risking that much, and he got, a storm just blew over him. Now, we knew going into the next fight, he was going to come in with a different game plan, a more aggressive game plan. And I'm going to say this because my prediction was way off. I predicted Sean to win, and I thought by the third round. And honestly, the third round went about as lopsided as it could have gone until he got finished. But when you think about their first fight, Suga Sean was very calm. This next fight, he came out and he was trying to implement some game plans and some unique striking. He looked really good. Don't make mistakes. Suga Sean O'Malley looked really good in those moments, especially on the feet. Even some of the takedown defense. I know he was 5 of 12 on takedowns, but that means he stuffed 7 of them. Yeah. Right? So that's not so bad.
His takedown defense is massively improved.
Yeah. So one thing I think is very interesting about the Sandhagen comparison to the whole situation is if Corey Sandhagen goes in there and doesn't move a lot, what's going to happen? Because Merab Dvalishvili has shown us that he can fight and succeed not only in every realm of MMA, but at every pace. He's very good at fighting faster than anybody at a higher pace than everybody, but he can also slow things down when he needs to. And you see that like in the fight against Umar, you saw it last night. He knows how to pull off just a little bit on the gas to make the person come in a little bit extra, and then he brings his pressure back in. So I really am intrigued by that matchup. But I will say in hindsight, a lot of people were predicting either Merab by decision or Suga by finish with some sort of, extracurricular technique. And I think now after we've watched the fight, and obviously it's easier to predict a fight after it's happened. I was way off on my prediction. But now that I think about it, Merab does want to be a finisher. He's the kind of guy that's willing to go out there and give it all. It's just usually the guys he's fighting are tough enough to make it to a decision. But this fight was so interesting because Merab had the ability to find a finish because of the aggression that Suga was fighting in. And now that I think about it, obviously I was way off, but Merab by decision or Merab by submission actually makes a lot of sense because we knew Suga Sean was going to have to go in there and risk it all. And usually that winds up leaving you in compromised positions. And it was either three things were going to happen, right? Merab's going to win a decision like he did last time. Suga's going to catch him with something crazy, or he's going to defeat Suga mentally, get him to the ground, and then Suga's going to realize there's no way to win this fight, and that's exactly what we saw. And obviously, you can't predict a fight after it's happened, and I'm way off on my prediction, but I just wanted to say that's a third option that we didn't consider. Nobody considered. Even the plus money on Merab by submission was pretty high. So nobody saw that coming. But I just want to say, now that I'm thinking about it the day after the fight, it makes sense that he found that submission.
And don't they always make sense after you watch it?
They
if
sure
only
do.
You could go back and bet on the fights the next day. So I want to talk about Sean because I think this video is obviously about Merab and how great he's becoming at bantamweight and just his skill set as a whole. But I think it's worth talking about Sean because Sean, what do you do with Sean, right? Now, the obvious choice is he moves to 145.
Right.
Sean's a big star. Is he going to stay at 135 and rematch Peter Yan? Yeah, I mean, that's a cool fight. Yeah. I'll watch that, but Corey Sandhagen's next. Yan needs something to do. But Sean's a guy that the UFC wants to put in big fights.
Yes.
And if we're going to do a rematch, why not make it with Aljo at 145?
Yeah.
I'd probably be more interested in that than the Peter Yan fight.
He also got past Peter Yan by the skin of his teeth. So.
That's true, yeah. And Aljo, I think, will hold up a lot better at 145. I don't know if that same shot would put him out because he was cutting a lot of weight and whatnot.
Right.
But to me, when you have a big star and there's a foe in the division who now just so happens to be the champion and you are now 0-2 against them and you just got finished by them, you're really kind of in no man's land because what are you going to do, a fight night main event? That's not where Sean O'Malley needs to live at this point. He's only like 30 years old. He's very young in his career still. And he's also a tall guy for the division. He's a skinny fella, but he's tall.
Right.
And so I think he can spend some time filling out that frame a little bit and make a little nice run at 145. Ilya's out of the division now. Now, there's no easy matchup at the top of 145 for Sean O'Malley, but there are some fresh matchups.
Yes.
Because you already have Sean against the champion twice. You've got him against Peter Yan and a lot of the up-and-comers. They just don't really make sense to throw him in there. So I think a fresh coat of paint is in order for Sean. I'd like to see what he does. You know, generally as human beings, especially men who compete in mixed martial arts, they tend to get a little bit bigger as they age. Sean is coming into his frame now. He's not that skinny kid that was once on the Contender Series. You know, he did look a little bit more muscular last night than he's looked in fights past. So I think a 145 move is the obvious next direction for Sean, or do you think he should stay at 35?
So that's the question, right? And he didn't tell us definitively, I want to move up to 145. But you have to understand who and what Sean is. He's a superstar, and he belongs in meaningful fights. I'm not saying he's too good to be a contender. I just don't see a world where Suga Sean is number 9, number 11 again. It just doesn't make sense to me. I think he's on that path because he's a big star. He knows that, a fresh coat of paint and 1 or 2 wins at 45, depending on how things go up there, could wind up in a title fight much faster than staying at 135. What are you going to do? Beat Peter Yan, like you said? All right. Well, then you're not going to get a Merab fight after that because you've lost to him twice. Very rarely do we see 0-2 guys get a third crack, right?
Yeah.
So there's only a few fights for him. And look, Umar Nurmagomedov would love that fight. That's a horrible fight for Suga Sean, I think. I don't think he needs to bounce back with a Nurmagomedov. I think he also can't go too far out of the rankings because then it's going to look like the UFC's trying to protect him a little. Let's keep him in the top 3. Let's give him a Mario Batista, which be careful what you wish for. That guy looked pretty damn good last night.
Yeah.
But maybe they're thinking like that. I believe Sean sees himself as a main eventer, a pay-per-view main eventer still. He's not going to fall off the card. And while every fight at 45 is difficult and possibly more difficult than the fights at 35, Merab is very, very strong. I would be willing to say, given off of what Ilya said, that Merab is as strong as all the 45ers that he's faced, that Sean has now felt the power of most of the guys at 45 through Merab. Now, Mavsar is probably a bit stronger than him, isometrically, and there's probably some guys that can really give him some fits, but Aljamain Sterling's a great wrestler, very strong, and he was able to win that fight.
Diego Lopez.
Yeah.
Yair Rodriguez is probably going to fight Volk for the title next. If that goes the way the first fight did. Sean O'Malley's coming off a loss. Yair Rodriguez would be coming off a loss. Like, don't tell me you wouldn't love to see Sean O'Malley versus Yair Rodriguez in a striking match, or a Diego Lopez. And don't think Sean doesn't think that's a bigger fight that's way freaking easier than Umar Nurmagomedov.
100%. Diego Lopez is the fight to make, in all honesty. And I think it'd be fun to see Sean go up to 45. The reason being is when he was
O'Malley versus Lopez. I like that a lot.
That's a great fight.
That's the fight.
And look, Diego's a little bit stronger, a little bit more powerful, but he's not as skilled and he's not as experienced. And that's why I think that fight would be pretty even going into it. Suga's got the ways that he could potentially win that fight, but make no mistake about it, Diego does as well. And what's most interesting to me about Sean moving up to 45 is what got him to the title fight at 135 was impeccable skill, great timing and precision with his striking, but above all, speed. He was getting to angles and getting to positions faster than the guys were able to defend them, and that's why he was able to put on such an incredible run with just chock full of highlight reel striking. So I believe speed is such a good advantage. And when you've got the pop on your shot like Suga, where you can knock people out at 135, yes, they might be a little bit more durable at 45, but if you're moving faster than them and the 10 pounds is going to mean they're a little bit slower than you, you might be able to find those targets a little bit better. And even though they're more durable, you find those targets a couple more times than you did at 35, you might find some success. Sean is not the kind of guy we need to throw out and just say, oh man, he was one of those, he's like Cody No Love. He got to the belt because the UFC allowed it, and as soon as he got to fight the true best off merit, he got fraud checked, as people say. There's no fraud check.
I'm so tired of that term, by the way, fraud check. Like, Sean O'Malley's not a fraud. He just got beaten by perhaps the best bantamweight of all time.
Right, you can comment fraud check to my bad predictions all you want, but don't call these guys in the main events frauds, because they're certainly not that. But yeah, I find it very interesting. And if you're asking me, it's a hard road back to 135. Sean doesn't want to have to cut all that weight, especially if there's truly no title fight in sight. I mean, Merab, I don't see Merab losing to Sanhagen. I don't know who he would fight after that. Possibly Peter Yan, possibly Umar again. But again, I don't really see Merab losing that belt. And if that's the case, then Sugar Sean, he can't go to 25. He's far too big. 35, there's nothing left for him to do, because I believe in his mind, he wants to be a title fighter, or he's not going to be in. It's kind of like Conor McGregor. Conor's not joining the ranks anymore. Once he had his day, then he sort of ushered himself out. He's sticking around for super fights. I believe Sugar Sean's best move that he could make would be to go to 145, see what he can get up there. A fresh coat. Now you're a former champion inserted into a division. Tell me if he wins one fight at 145, people wouldn't want to see a Diego Lopez or even a Volkanovski. Like, these are some fun fights for the fans, and Sean always entertains. He's a company guy. The UFC gives him what he wants because he gives them such great results and fun fights, and he generates so much revenue. So I think the sky's the limit for Sugar, even though he's coming off a loss, but he just does not have the ingredients to defeat a guy like Merab. And with Merab sitting at the top of the division, not going anywhere soon, in my opinion, the best thing for him to do would be to go 145.
Two things about Sean O'Malley at 145. One, they need to insert him with the right fight. Diego Lopez serves as that perfect opponent, because Diego Lopez is going to give Sean the fight he wants. He's a wide open bite down striker, and Sean is a very precise sniper style striker with power, and I would love to see what his power is at 145. That immediately inserts him into the top 5 at 145. So you have your, okay, we're going to move weight classes. How do we do it intelligently and get you a number next to your name, preferably a number that's 5 or less? Diego Lopez is that answer. Number 2, and it's not the right thing to do, but it is the thing that if you look at the past history of the UFC, they will absolutely do, is give somebody who's a big star like a Sean O'Malley preferential treatment, i.e. a title shot, against somebody like Volkanovski over somebody who's more deserving like a Movsar Evloev. But that's just the business. You know, hate it or love it, that's the way things work. You get Sean O'Malley into a top 5 position. If he can knock out Diego Lopez with an emphatic finish, then you absolutely have the UFC matchmakers talking about how do we position this thing for Sean to take on either Yair or Volk, probably Volk, just judging by the first way it went. And they're saying, you know, Volkanovski's 36, 37 years old. He's great, but he also likes to strike a lot. Yes, he can take people down, but he's shorter. He has been knocked out by Ilya. You know, all these conversations start to happen. And as I said, is that fair to Movsar? No, it's not. And maybe they give Movsar an opportunity first and see what happens there.
Right.
But the point is, how do you get Sean back in the conversation of being a meaningful fighter in a weight class? And I see that conversation very difficult to have at 135 at this point in time because of the fact that he's lost twice to Merab now. But I see that conversation much, much easier at 145 if they give him somebody like a Diego Lopez or even a Yair Rodriguez if he loses to Volk. You know, loser coming off of Sean losing, Yair losing, put them together. That's a striking matchup. Those are the kind of things that make sense. And that's why I think it's absolutely imperative that Sean move to 145.
I agree. Yeah, fighting is a sport and sports are entertainment. The UFC is a business and they try to make good business so they can stay afloat. And while I love Yair, Diego, Movsar, you name them, T-City, they're all great fighters at 145. They are not the stars that Sugar Sean is. And Volkanovski has done so much for the company. If he defends his title against Yair, why not give him a fight against another former champion? That's a big fight for the UFC to make. Probably the biggest they could make between 35 and 45, honestly, would be Sugar and Volkanovski. And yes, stylistically, that's probably a nightmare matchup for Sugar, but it's honestly, at this stage, it might be a better stylistic matchup than Sugar versus Merab because the tenacity and the gas tank is what really is set apart between Merab and Sugar. Where Sugar lacks is where Merab shines. And while Volkanovski's so good everywhere, truly one of the best fighters in the world, he doesn't quite have the gas tank or the stamina that Merab has, and he doesn't quite fight with the same pressure. He will play a little bit more defense. Merab's defense is just throw everything at you. I don't need defense because I'm just throwing offense exclusively. Volkanovski's a little bit more calm, poised, and cautious when he's starting fights, and that could be exactly what Suga Sean needs. Now, I'm getting way, way too far ahead of myself because Suga needs to get himself a win, and he's still a weight class below. But I do think that Tim and Suga will devise a game plan and figure out which division to attack. I have a feeling it's going to be 45, and something tells me a guy like Diego Lopez would love to get a former champion like Suga Sean to sign the dotted line.
That's the fight to make.